It's a strange thing to pray in this environment. It's a strange thing for me to put this out in the universe and not be able to see you or interact with you besides in the text comments. And it must be even stranger for you to look up at your TV or down at your iPad and see me in close-up, for which I am deeply sorry. I wonder all the time, are you singing along? Do you clap more loudly than you do in the sanctuary or less? Do you harmonize? Does prayer feel easier or harder in these moments? I really am honestly curious, and I hope that at some point you might share with me the experience from your side of the screen. Growing up, I didn't consider myself a prayer person. My family rarely went to services, and when we did, it was likely for a special event. I liked High Holy Day services, and I said the words on the page, but I didn't give it much thought as to what I was doing or why it mattered. When I got to rabbinical school, things hadn't much improved. While at that point, I led a great many prayer services at Hillel and in my job as a youth group advisor, I still didn't feel like prayer was something I had access to. By this time, I had other reasons too. My theology had developed in those intervening years into something that made prayer harder, not easier. To the extent that I understood my own beliefs about God, I didn't believe in a God who answered individual prayers. I didn't believe in a God who listened to your prayer for healing and decided if you were deserving enough or if your prayer was sincere enough. I like to think of myself as a rationalist and looked at the world around me. I saw little evidence of the efficacy of prayer beyond what I might have labeled as a placebo effect of feeling better. Prayer seemed to me to be a magic spell, and I didn't believe in magic. So entering into rabbinical school, I had some trepidation. What if the school found out that I didn't believe in the power of prayer? Would they drum me out of the core? It was after a few months that I realized a secret nobody had told me in all the years I had aspired to go to rabbinical school. Lots of rabbinical students don't care much about prayer. Lots of rabbis get into this line of work for other reasons: a love of teaching, a love of learning, a love of pastoral care. But the spirituality of prayer, at least in a Reform seminary, is not the most widely given first answer. There are services at school every morning, and lots of people just don't go. Or even for those who do go, some of them, it's a practice to practice the liturgy or to see how their peers lead, but not as a deep spiritual expression. And this is where I was. I liked attending morning services and went as regularly as I could, but it was not out of a deep sense of prayerfulness. More, if I'm honest, out of a sense of obligation and solidarity with my friends leading services. I now had a better grasp of the Hebrew in the prayer book, and I could see even more of those flaws, the parts that felt incongruous, inconsistent, or archaic. I was troubled by the patriarchal language and the messianic messages. I was praying more than ever, but it was just as hard as ever. But then something started to change. It was around the time my mother was dying of cancer all too young, one of those life-changing moments that makes you question your previously held assumptions and opens you to new possibilities. I decided to conduct an experiment. I knew I had all these reservations about prayer, this long list of reasons why I thought it didn't work. But I decided to take all of these challenges I had with the prayer book and with my theology and my desire for rationality and put them on a shelf in my mind, and then just to pray anyway. I decided to pray like a person who believed in prayer. I decided to pray through my reservations and my intellectual misgivings. I decided to work backwards. Instead of starting with what I believed and letting that dictate my prayer, I started to pray and let that open up new possibilities in what I believed. One of my favorite articles about prayer is a short essay entitled "Surrendering to the Preposterousness of Prayer" by Rabbi J. Michelson. In it, he describes essentially my conundrum and my experiment. He starts by asking us to admit that prayer is a preposterous act. In the bright light of day, most of us don't believe in a God who answers petitional prayers. And he points out it's not just us. Even our traditional Jewish sources don't take the act of prayer as literally as we may think they do. They understand prayer in the realm of poetry and metaphor much more than we might have guessed. Our rabbinical literature is much less focused on how prayer changes God and much more focused on how it changes us. Prayer to the rabbis is about devotion. Even Maimonides, Michael points out, the great rationalist, understood prayer as a time for the heart to open. Rabbi Michelson argues that our heart's longing is not bound by our mind's desire for reason. He writes, the heart knows that it yearns, a desire that includes a yearning to have a yearned for. Yes, devotion implies a devoted to. It implies duality and a primitive, problematic notion of God. But who except the die-hard atheist can really say that when the chips are down, they do not turn to a primitive theological idea of God? In the hospital, in the trenches, at such times theology goes out the window and the heart cries in a language the mind can neither approve nor understand. And similar, though gentler, yearnings are with us all the time, to articulate our hopes, to feel that we are loved, to express gratitude. None of this depends on theology. If we can set aside our embarrassment at this primal, seemingly anti-modern urge, we can access something real. Our liberal Jewish forefathers taught us to dismiss these kinds of acts of spiritual passion, whether it's from New Age hippies or unsophisticated evangelicals or bewildering Southern Baptists. And yet, hope and longing are the heart's native language, and even hundreds of years of enlightenment cannot rewrite this essential code. And so Michelson says, let us see prayer as a tool for the heart, not the head. He writes, let us give up on prayer as making any sense at all, but let's not stop praying. Ironically, the very act of admission of surrendering the pretension of sense-making and admitting that, yes, damn it, I want to pray, I want to yearn, I want to ask that all-powerful mother or father figure for what I need most, this very act is the gateway to authentic prayer itself. Giving up the attempt to square the circle, to make all the parts fit, is a great release of inhibition and the pretensions of knowledge. A great I don't know replaces the arrogant claims to metaphysical certainty. I have noticed that this moment of global crisis accentuates all of what Michelson calls the preposterousness of prayer. Are our prayers only effective when we stand up for Baruch Hu? Does prayer work even if while Barbara is singing hallelujah, you are eating your Cheerios? And on the grandest scale, will our prayers for peace, hope, and healing be heard in a world whose brokenness is more evident with each passing day? We may wonder these questions all the time, but in the sanctuary, there are distractions. You can flip through the book. You can talk to your neighbor. When I say we rise for Baruch Hu, you can do it because everyone else is doing it, and avoid considering if you really need to. At home, praying across the broadband and the Wi-Fi, these questions become more urgent or at least less avoidable. When you are the only person in the room rising, you can't avoid wondering why you did it or didn't do it. Plus, somehow gravity pulls us harder when we are on the couch than it does when we are in our sanctuary's pews. But perhaps this makes this the perfect time to practice Rabbi Michelson's surrender. If you lose yourself into prayer, who will know? Who will judge if you sing at the top of your lungs or harmonize off key or, God forbid, dance ecstatically? Who will know? And what if you laugh a deep belly laugh of joy? And what if you weep with every fiber of your being? And what if you let your mind give your heart permission to do its work? 6 days a week, we can live in the realm of the mind with the serious and urgent questions of the day. What will we do to make ends meet? When is it safe to go out? How is this affecting the people I love and the people most vulnerable? These questions must not be dismissed. But perhaps we will have more brain power to answer them if we have taken an hour or two to listen to our hearts. Perhaps the mental energy that our brains devote to soothing and quieting our heart's yearnings could be put to better use later if, in this moment, we told our minds to hush up and listen to our hearts for a bit. This is essential Jewish prayer. As Michelson describes, it is the heart dancing, imagining, and of course projecting. Unlike naive prayer, it does not assume the existence of a separate deity who will answer the petitions of the sufficiently pious. Unlike rationalized prayer, it does not masquerade as meditation or magic. And unlike the avoidance or hesitation of the overly uptight or sophisticated, it does not submit the needs of the heart to the cynical auditing of the intellect. This, says Michelson, is the guts and the tears and the lifeblood of prayer, unashamed of its nakedness, pleading and demanding, shuckling and clapping, or at times at which the soul is in constriction, just going through the motions in the hope that something, somewhere, will loosen. In my experiment, which began in rabbinical school and which I am still conducting, I discovered that I love to pray. I discovered that my heart muscle is as valuable to me as my mind. I learned about my body, which is more than a vessel for my mind and heart, but feeds and sustains them. I learned a humility and a patience that I desperately need to keep practicing, especially now. I learned something that before I never thought I would say. I need prayer, and God needs me to pray. So now, maybe no one is watching, except perhaps God. Now maybe the world is desperate for every ounce of your human goodness. Now maybe your heart's longing is louder and more urgent and more primal than ever before. So maybe now is the time to practice praying, not just going through the motions or watching the videos or humming along. Now is the time to practice unbridled prayer, wild prayer, ecstatic prayer. Now is the time to let the words and the melodies crack you open so that the longings of your heart can pour out, and so that something hopeful, something eternal, something divine might pour back in. Now we stand. Wherever we are, in whatever mikdash ma'at, tiny personal sanctuary you find yourself in, and together and apart, ready or not, confident or trepidation, broken and hopeful, yearning and breathing and becoming. Now it is time to pray. We rise in body or spirit for Baruch Hu.